Clara hadn't expected kindness, but she hadn't expected the fist either. The wedding guests were barely gone when her new husband, Grant Walker, slammed the cabin door shut and turned on her like a wolf that had tasted blood. Her wedding veil still hung from her hair, torn and crooked, as his knuckles crashed against her jaw. The lantern swung wildly from its hook, casting jagged shadows across the walls as she stumbled backward over the unmade bed. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth, but refused to cry. She had cried enough when her father sold her to this man for 3 cattle and a broken wagon. "You'll learn your place tonight," Grant sneered, grabbing her wrist so hard she felt the bones grind. Clara fought back, nails clawing at his face, but he was twice her size and fueled by whiskey and rage. Somewhere outside, laughter still echoed from the men who had toasted this cursed union. None of them would help her now. Except one. She didn't see him at first. She only heard the door crash open like thunder splitting the sky. "Let her go," came the voice, sharp, steady, colder than the night air pouring through the doorway. Grant spun, startled, but his grip didn't loosen. There stood Levi Carter, the best man, his childhood friend. The one who'd smiled stiffly through the ceremony, who'd stood silent when Clara's eyes begged someone, anyone, to stop this marriage before it began. But now he stood in the doorway, rifle slung across his back, fists clenched at his sides. "This is my wife, Levi," Grant growled. "You're a guest. Know your place." Levi's jaw tensed. "A wife ain't a punching bag." Grant laughed, low and mean. "Since when did you care what happened to my bride? Since the day I watched you steal her spirit?" Levi took one slow step forward. "And I'm done watching." The room crackled with something hotter than fire, old friendship breaking under the weight of right and wrong. Clara, breathless, met Levi's eyes across the room. For the first time, someone saw her not as a burden or property, but as a woman worth saving. Grant's fist swung toward Levi, but Levi was faster. One clean punch sent Grant sprawling into the wall. Without a word, Levi grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward the open door. "Come on," he said, voice rough but sure. "My horse is waiting." The night air hit Clara like a slap, sharp and freezing, but it was nothing compared to the violence she'd left behind. Levi didn't give her time to stumble. He pulled her toward his horse, a broad, dark gelding tied loosely to a fence post, steam rising from its flanks in the cold. Clara's wedding dress tore at the hem as she ran, snagging on brambles and broken boards, but she barely noticed. Behind them, the cabin door swung wide, and Grant's roar exploded into the darkness. "Levi, you bring her back or you'll answer to me." Levi threw a glance over his shoulder, face carved from stone. "You already had your answer." In one smooth motion, he boosted Clara onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. She tensed as his arm came around her waist, but there was no force in his grip, only urgency. "Hold on," he said quietly. Then he spurred the horse forward, and they tore into the darkness. The prairie stretched before them, silvered in moonlight and frost, the wind biting at their skin like 1,000 tiny knives. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't know where they were going, only that every hoofbeat carried her further from the nightmare she'd been forced to marry. "He'll come after us," she gasped. Levi's voice was low against her ear. "I'm counting on it." She twisted to look at him, confused. He didn't meet her gaze. "He's been hurting folks for too long. If we run far enough, he'll think we're scared. But if we stop first, we can end this." Clara swallowed hard, her throat raw. "End it how?" Levi's jaw clenched. "I've got a place up past the ridge. Supplies, ammo, shelter. We'll make our stand there." Her pulse stumbled. "You planned this?" Not like this, he admitted. But the day I watched your father sign you away to him, I knew I couldn't keep standing by. The horse charged through a frozen stream, water splashing cold against Clara's legs. She felt the weight of Levi's coat around her shoulders, placed there without a word. She clutched it tight. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. The wind howled behind them, and far in the distance, another horse's cry rang out, angry and close. Grant was riding hard, and he wasn't coming alone. Clara shivered, not from cold, but from the storm she knew was following them. But beside her, Levi rode steady and silent, a man who'd chosen her side, no matter the cost. By the time they reached the ridge, Clara's hands were numb, and her lips trembled from exhaustion and fear. But Levi never slowed. The trail twisted through jagged rocks and narrow passes where one wrong step would have sent them tumbling into darkness. He rode like a man who knew every danger and trusted his horse to know the rest. At the ridge's peak stood an old hunting cabin, half hidden by pines, roof patched with tin and tar. Levi dismounted first, lifting Clara down as gently as if she were porcelain instead of a woman who'd just been broken and mended in the same night. She stumbled, her legs unsteady. Levi caught her elbow but didn't linger, respecting her strength even when she had none left to show. "We'll rest here, but not long," he said, voice steady but urgent. "They'll find this place by dawn." He led the horse into a crude lean-to and stripped the saddle, working fast. Clara wrapped herself in an old wool blanket she found hanging on the cabin wall. Its smell of cedar and smoke calmed her racing mind. Inside, Levi lit a lantern and laid out his supplies: a rifle, a revolver, a box of shells, and 2 worn canteens. "You always keep this ready?" she asked, her voice dry and quiet. He gave a tight nod. "A man like Grant leaves a trail of enemies. I just never thought I'd be the one who'd have to stop him." Clara sat by the fire Levi built from dry branches and flint. The heat crept into her bones, melting the last of the cold. "Why did you stay his friend for so long?" she asked, unable to silence the question burning in her throat. Levi sighed, staring into the flames. "Because once, when we were boys, he saved me from drowning in the creek. I figured I owed him my loyalty. But tonight proved something else." She met his eyes, waiting. He looked tired but sure. "A debt doesn't mean you let a man drown someone else." The wind screamed outside like a warning. Levi stood and checked the door, then loaded the rifle with steady hands. "They'll be here by sunrise." Clara rose beside him, pulling the blanket tighter. "And when they come?" He glanced at her, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. "Then we make sure they regret every mile they rode." She didn't flinch. For the first time, she wasn't waiting to be saved. She was ready to fight beside him. The first rays of sunlight crept over the ridge just as the hoofbeats thundered through the valley below. Levi had been listening for them all night, the distant echo of men riding hard, their anger louder than the wind. Clara stood beside him at the cabin window, her face pale but steady, the rifle Levi had placed in her hands trembling only slightly. "There's 5 of them," Levi said, his voice low and even. "Grant, and the men too scared to tell him no." She swallowed hard, forcing down the fear that clawed at her throat. "Can we hold them off?" Levi gave a tight smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Long enough." They set their positions. Levi by the door, where the cabin's frame offered cover, and Clara by the back window, eyes trained on the clearing where the riders would appear. The waiting stretched thin, every second feeling like a thread ready to snap. And then they came. Grant led them, his face twisted in fury, his rifle raised high. "Levi Carter!" he roared. "You bring her out now or I'll burn that shack to the ground!" Levi stepped into the doorway, rifle leveled at Grant's chest. "You burn it and you burn with it!" Grant laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're dead, Carter, and when I'm done with you, I'm taking her back." Clara's heart pounded. She tightened her grip on the rifle and steadied her aim. She wasn't going back. Not to that life. Not ever. Levy spoke without taking his eyes off Grant. "This ain't about her anymore. This is about you and the man you became." Grant sneered, spitting into the dirt. "Fine. Then let's end it." He raised his rifle. Clara fired first. The shot cracked the morning silence, sharp and final. Grant's hat flew from his head as he stumbled back, shocked more by the fact that she'd fired than by the missed shot. Levi took the opening. His bullet struck the ground inches from Grant's boots. "Next one takes your leg," Levi warned. Grant's men hesitated, nerves cracking beneath their bravado. They hadn't signed up for a firefight against two people who weren't supposed to have this much fight left in them. "Turn around," Levi said, his voice hard as stone. "Ride away. You're following a dead man." For a long breath, nothing moved. Then, one by one, Grant's men lowered their weapons. They turned their horses, spurred them hard, and disappeared down the ridge, leaving Grant alone in the rising sun. Grant stood alone in the clearing, steam rising from his breath like smoke from a dying fire. The men who had laughed at his wedding table, who had toasted his cruelty and cheered his power, had left him to face the morning alone. His rifle hung limp in his hand, dust settling on his boots as if the earth itself had already buried him. Levi stepped down from the cabin porch, rifle still raised but his voice quiet. "It's over, Grant. You can leave. No one else needs to bleed today." But Grant only laughed, hollow and bitter. "You think she'll thank you for this? You think riding off with my bride makes you some kind of hero?" Clara stepped forward, her grip steady on the rifle. "I was never your bride, Grant. I was your possession, and I'm done living in a cage." His eyes burned with something wild and broken. "You think you'll find happiness with him? He's no better than me. Just another man looking to own what he can't keep." Levi's jaw tensed, but he didn't rise to the bait. "I don't own anyone, Grant. She rides beside me, not behind." Grant's laugh died in his throat. He lifted his rifle slowly, shaking with rage and defeat. Clara didn't hesitate. She stepped in front of Levi, raising her weapon squarely at the man who had beaten her into silence. "Lower it," she commanded, her voice sharper than any bullet. For a heartbeat, everything stood still. The wind, the trees, the fragile line between life and death. And then Grant did something neither of them expected. He lowered the rifle and dropped it into the dirt. Shoulders slumping, chest heaving, he looked at Clara like a man staring at the ghost of the life he'd destroyed. "You win," he rasped, "but don't think this ridge will save you from the world." Levi kept his aim steady. "We'll take our chances." Grant turned without another word, staggering toward his horse. He mounted slowly, as if every muscle in his body resisted the ride home. And then he was gone, swallowed by the pines and the rising light of morning. Clara's knees nearly gave out, but Levi caught her before she fell. "It's over," he whispered. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. It's just beginning." And for the first time, she believed it. The ridge was quiet again, save for the whisper of wind through the pines and the soft crackle of the fire Levi rebuilt that afternoon. Clara sat beside the hearth, peeling away the tattered remains of her wedding dress, turning it into strips of cloth for cleaning the rifles. She'd never imagined peace would look like this, rough hands mending tools, tired feet resting against a stone hearth. Silence that didn't feel like a threat. Levi finished patching the hole in the cabin roof, wiping sweat from his brow as he dropped beside her. "We've got enough supplies for a week," he said, voice low. "After that, we'll need to head down the valley for trade." And if Grant's waiting? Clara asked, not looking up from her work. Levi shrugged. Then we ride somewhere he ain't. She smiled faintly, fingers still working the cloth. You make it sound simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, he said, but simple's enough for now. They ate quietly, sharing what little jerky and dried apples Levi had left. Clara ate slow, letting her stomach settle into the idea of food without fear. Nathan, Levi's old gelding, stood outside in the clearing, grazing under the sunset. As darkness fell, Levi stoked the fire higher. You can take the bed tonight, he said. I'll keep watch. No, Clara said softly but firm. We share the fire. No walls between us. I've lived too long with walls. He hesitated, then nodded, respecting her decision. They sat shoulder to shoulder beside the flames, warmth melting the chill that still lingered in her bones. When this is done, she whispered, when we find a place far from all this, what then? Levi leaned back against the cabin wall, eyes soft beneath the firelight. Then we build something better, something no man can take with fists or fear. She turned to him, searching his face for the cracks, the hidden shadows. And if it finds us again? He smiled, tired but true. Then we fight again, together. The night stretched long and quiet, but for the first time in months, Clara didn't dread the dark. She rested her head against his shoulder, the steady beat of his heart grounding her in a way nothing else had. Outside, the wind carried the last of Grant's storm far down the ridge. And in that cabin, surrounded by silence and scars, two souls began to believe that maybe the world still held places worth saving. The days passed quieter than Clara ever thought possible. She and Levi fell into a rhythm, hunting, chopping wood, mending what the winter wind had torn down. It wasn't the life she imagined as a girl, but it was hers now. And every moment felt borrowed from a world that once tried to bury her. But peace on the frontier is as thin as spring ice. It cracked on the 7th evening, just as the sun kissed the treetops and the birds fell silent. Levi froze mid-swing, axe in hand, as distant hoofbeats echoed faintly through the trees. Not Grant's heavy gallop. This was different, slower, measured. Clara stepped out from the cabin, wiping her hands on her skirt. She met Levi's gaze across the clearing, her stomach twisting tight. More trouble? She asked. Levi's eyes narrowed. Could be worse than Grant, could be lawmen. She felt the blood drain from her face. Lawmen? Grant's family's rich. They'd pay a sheriff to chase down what he couldn't finish himself. Levi wiped his hands and grabbed the rifle from the porch. Inside. Now. But Clara didn't move. If it's the law, running makes us look guilty. Guilty or dead, Levi muttered. He scanned the ridgeline. A single rider broke through the trees. Gray coat, wide-brimmed hat, badge glinting in the last light of day. A sheriff. Levi stepped forward, gun low but ready. Evening, the man called, his voice steady but without malice. Looking for Levi Carter and a woman named Clara Walker. Levi's grip tightened. Who's asking? The sheriff reined in his horse, sighing like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Sheriff Holt, got a wire from Pine Ridge, says a woman was kidnapped from her wedding night and a man shot the groom. Town's in a stir. Clara stepped beside Levi, lifting her chin. I wasn't kidnapped. I was rescued. And as for Grant Walker, ask him if he still thinks I'm his property. Holt's eyes softened just a fraction. I figured as much. That's why I came alone. He dismounted slowly, hands open and empty. Law's a mess in those parts. Sometimes the right thing ain't what the badge says it is. Levi lowered his rifle, heart still pounding. "So what happens now?" The sheriff looked between them, then toward the fading sun. "I'll tell Pine Ridge I didn't find anyone, but I suggest you two keep riding. This place won't stay quiet long." Clara took Levi's hand, fingers steady. "Then we leave at dawn." And as night fell over the ridge once more, they knew their fight for freedom was far from over. But at least they'd fight it together. Dawn rose pale and cold as they packed their lives onto Levi's horse. What little they owned fit into a single satchel and a roll of blankets, but neither of them cared for possessions anymore. They cared for miles. Miles between them and the past, between them and the town that had tried to chain Clara to a nightmare. Levi tightened the saddle straps, while Clara wrapped the last of the dried venison in cloth. Her hands were steady now, her movements sure. The helpless girl who had once stood trembling in a bloodied wedding dress was gone. "Ready?" Levi asked, adjusting the rifle slung across his back. Clara gave a soft smile. "I've been ready since the night I climbed on your horse." They left without looking back, the cabin shrinking into the morning mist. The ridge gave way to open plains, golden and wide beneath the rising sun. For the first few hours, neither of them spoke. There was a peace in the quiet, in the steady rhythm of hooves against soft earth. Then, as the hills rolled into sight, Clara finally asked, "Where does this road end?" Levi tilted his head, considering. "Nowhere worth running from." She smiled faintly at that. "And what if someone else tries to stop us?" Levi's eyes stayed forward, sharp and steady. "Then we remind them some people ain't meant to be caged." By midday, they reached a stream where wildflowers lined the banks like a promise. Levi helped Clara down from the saddle, his hands careful but no longer hesitant. She knelt by the water, washing the dust from her face, feeling the cold bite of freedom against her skin. "You ever wonder what happens next?" she asked, glancing back at him. He crouched beside her, cupping water into his hands. "Every day, but I stopped fearing it the moment we left that ridge." They ate in the shade of an oak tree, shared the last of the bread and dried apples, and watched hawks circle far above. For the first time, Clara felt the world open instead of close. As the sun dipped low again, Levi stood, extending his hand toward her. "Come on, there's a town west of here. Folks say they don't ask questions, and they pay fair for hard work." Clara took his hand and stood beside him, taller somehow than she'd ever felt before. "A place where a woman ain't just someone's wife?" Levi smiled, soft and true. "A place where you're whoever you decide to be." And so they rode west, where the past couldn't follow, and the road belonged only to them. The town of Dry Creek wasn't much to look at, just a scatter of sun-bleached buildings and crooked signs swaying in the desert wind. But to Clara, it gleamed like a fresh start. The people there didn't stare too long, or ask where they'd come from. Maybe they were too tired from their own troubles, or maybe Dry Creek had seen enough ghosts to know better than to chase new ones. Levi stabled the horse at the edge of town, patting its flank like an old friend. "We'll need to lay low, work where we can, keep our heads down." Clara nodded, pulling the borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders. "What do we tell them we're running from?" Levi gave a dry smile. "Nothing. Folks here are running too." They found work fast. Levi took to the blacksmith's forge, hammering steel like it was penance for every wrong turn in his past. Clara found a quiet place at the bakery, hands kneading dough instead of grasping for survival. The pay was thin, but it was honest, and at night they shared a rented room above the general store. No fancy dresses, no fine linens, just peace, or close enough to it. but peace has a habit of making you hear the cracks beneath your feet. And one night, as they sat by the window watching the stars fade into dawn, Clara broke the silence. "Do you ever miss who you used to be?" Levi didn't answer right away. He rubbed his jaw, watching the horizon. "Sometimes, but mostly I'm scared of becoming him again." She touched his hand gently, fingers rough but kind. "You're not that man anymore. You changed when you stepped through that cabin door." He looked at her, something soft and raw behind his tired smile. "And you changed when you stepped out." They sat like that for a long time, no words needed. But just before sleep, Levi spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "Your name's still Walker in this town's ledger. You want to change it?" Clara considered it. The name carried bruises and chains, but it also carried the woman who broke them. She shook her head slowly. "Number, let them hear my name and wonder how I survived it." Levi smiled, pride shining through the weariness. "Then Clara Walker it is." The sun rose over Dry Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty street. And for the first time in their tangled journey, the future didn't feel like something chasing them. It felt like something waiting to be written. Weeks turned into months, and the scars they carried faded into something softer, something earned. Dry Creek wasn't a place where legends were born, but it was where broken people found quiet. And sometimes, quiet was enough. Levi built a forge behind the bakery, hammering horseshoes and wagon parts until his hands were too tired to tremble from memories. Clara rose before dawn, baking bread that filled the streets with warmth instead of fear. Neighbors began to greet her by name, not by whispers, but the past was a patient hunter. One cloudless morning, as Clara stacked loaves on the shop counter, a stranger rode into town, wearing Grant Walker's family crest on his saddle. His eyes searched the streets like a wolf scenting blood. Levi found her first, his face calm but his voice tight. "It's one of his brothers. Looks like they're looking to finish what Grant couldn't." Clara didn't flinch. "Do we run again?" Levi shook his head, a quiet fire behind his words. "We stand, like we did before." That night, they waited outside the forge, rifles ready, hearts steady. But the man never came. Maybe he saw something in their eyes that told him the story had already been written. Or maybe Dry Creek itself warned him off, a town that didn't take kindly to ghosts stirring up dust. Days passed. The stranger left without a word, and the world kept turning. And so did they. On the first warm night of spring, Levi rebuilt the chapel bell in the center of town, repairing what the storms of men had once broken. Clara watched him from the steps, a soft smile playing at her lips. "Why fix something no one rings anymore?" she asked. Levi wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up at the bell's shine. "Because someday, someone might need to hear it again." She walked toward him, slipping her hand into his, feeling the rough calluses and steady warmth. "And what about us?" she whispered. "What do we need?" He smiled, tired but whole. "Nothing but this. A fire we chose to build, not one we had to survive." That night, under a sky littered with stars, they shared bread, laughter, and a silence that felt like home. No chains, no debts, no ghosts knocking on their door. Just two souls who refused to be written out of their own story. And in the quiet heart of Dry Creek, the fire between them burned on, steadier, softer, and finally theirs to keep.